Peace and blessings. Welcome back to the channel once again, where we talk all things health and healing from a holistic perspective. And today will be no different. Now, one of the questions I get all the time is, Doc, how can I lower my cholesterol? And because most people have probably gone to an annual visit and the doctor has shown them on their labs that they have high cholesterol, okay? But what I want to do in this video is first help people understand why we actually need cholesterol, which is healthy fat. Okay, so I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. Why we actually need healthy fat or cholesterol in our diets, and why our bodies actually make it as well too. So we're going to dive into how the liver is actually very, very important or essential into making the vast majority of the cholesterol in our bodies, okay? And what role does that play in our body? So I'll talk to you initially why we actually need cholesterol. I'll explain why cholesterol then becomes a problem, and then I'll show you why your liver health plays a major role when it comes to your cholesterol levels, okay? So let's first get started by explaining why cholesterol is so important when it comes to our overall health. So number one, cholesterol is needed in virtually every cell in the body. Every cell in the body has a cell membrane, okay, that surrounds it, okay? And that cell membrane is a lipid bilayer, okay? That lipid bilayer decide what comes in and out of the cell, okay? So without healthy cholesterol, we wouldn't be able to make cells, okay? And that is all we are. We are just about 37 trillion cells, okay? So that's the number one reason why cholesterol is so essential when it comes to human life and animal life for that matter, okay? So cell membrane, all right? Number two is because cholesterol is the backbone for all of our sex hormones, okay? What predicts whether we're a man or a woman, okay? When it comes to, our sex hormones, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, all right? It requires cholesterol to be able to make these sex hormones. Without cholesterol, you're not able to make these sex hormones. So if a person was highly deficient in healthy fats, they probably would have a hormonal issue, specifically with the sex hormones, okay? The other thing that is really important, I kind of just touched on it, is that cholesterol is a builder, okay? It is the building block for building tissues, certain tissues, like the brain and the spinal cord. But it's also the building block, as I said before, for virtually every cell in the body, because every cell in the body has a cell membrane. Okay, so without cholesterol, we can't make cells because cells require a cell membrane. Okay, it's also essential for repairing. Okay, so a lot of people, when they think about cholesterol, they think about it from the standpoint of clogging arteries. Okay, when the arteries get clogged, they increase the potential to have a stroke or a heart attack. Now, think about this for a second. That's one perspective. The other perspective is maybe it's repairing. And what do I mean by repairing? Sometimes what happens because of our diet is so acidic, so toxic, that what's happening is the foods that we're eating that are loaded with toxins, because 70% of the standard American diet is processed foods, which means it is loaded with food chemicals, okay? These food chemicals don't always break down. And specifically, a lot of the salt that we use in our diet, a lot of the sugar that we use in our diet is in the form of granulated crystals that don't break down, which means they're like shards of glass when they're in our bloodstream, okay? These type of foods, processed foods particularly, can literally cause micro tears along the inner lining of the blood vessels, okay? Those micro tears have to be patched up, and guess what comes in to patch it up? Cholesterol, okay? Now, so what you may be seeing as the artery being occluded, okay, and then eventually it leads to atherosclerosis, and then it blocks off this artery. Well, the issue was that it was constantly being assaulted with the foods that we were eating. And so the cholesterol was just simply coming there to patch it up. And the more and more it patched it up, the unfortunate thing, the more layers you add to something, the more occluded it becomes, okay? So the real issue isn't the cholesterol. Maybe the issue is the constant assault, which is coming from the diet. Okay, so cholesterol is a repair also. It also is essential when it comes to making bile. And bile is made in the liver, sent to the gallbladder, and then excreted when it's time to emulsify fats in our diets. Okay, so our fats have to be broken down, and guess what does that? Bile. Okay, and you have to have cholesterol to be able to make bile. All right, also vitamin D. Okay, I talk about vitamin D all the time because 76% of African Americans are actually deficient in vitamin D, and somewhere around 40 to 50% of everyone else is deficient in vitamin D. So none of us are getting a sufficient amount of sun, and we are sun people. Our ancestors lived, worked, and exclusively lived outside for thousands of years in the sun. And so it isn't until the last maybe 50, 60 years that we stopped really doing that. Our jobs went from being primarily outside to being inside, okay, in the last 50, 60, 70 years. So we've gone away from the sun, which is, it's just like anything. You don't use it, you lose it. And so a lot of us are becoming sensitive to the sun, but it doesn't mean that we're allergic to the sun, which is a whole nother topic. But the most important thing I want you to know is that we need cholesterol to make vitamin D. Okay, so if you don't have vitamin D, you will not have a strong immune system, and among other things that vitamin D does. Okay, and so it's essential that we have healthy fats in our diets for that reason as well too. And when we're talking about fats, especially when it's around the vitals or that annual checkup, we're usually talking about them from the standpoint of bad cholesterol and good cholesterol. And I'm using air quotes with those because I don't think there's any bad or good to them. It's just, what we do to them as a result of our lifestyle. And I'll get into that in just a second. But LDL is commonly referred to as the bad cholesterol because it's looked at as the type of cholesterol that occludes the arteries. And then HDL is actually looked at as the good cholesterol. So actually HDL, you want to have a higher HDL. Okay, so higher HDL greater than 50 is actually a plus when it comes to your annual exam. And the reason why is because HDL is actually the precursor for a lot of the sex hormones that we make in our bodies. Okay, so it's not necessarily the bad cholesterol. The HDL is the precursor for those sex hormones. Okay, so that's why they call it the good cholesterol. Okay, now what's really important to understand is quite often when people are having high cholesterol, their doctors are putting them on prescriptions known as statins. Okay, this could be Lipitor, this could be, any other those type of drugs. Okay, but what's really important to know about statins is this. A lot of the statins, if you look at the studies, what they've been able to discover is that the statins initially, they botched a lot of the studies. And what I mean by that was they were giving absolute data on the studies instead of relative data. And that put this, that totally changed how beneficial the statin drugs were. Now, despite the fact that that came out and we now understand that, they're still being prescribed. And on top of that, not only was that discovered, but it was also discovered that statins, for many people, increase the risk for diabetes. Statins also cause this condition known as rhabdomyolysis, which is a lot of pain in the muscles. So what a lot of people were noticing is that they had more and more pain in the muscles, so they stopped working out, they stopped walking as much too, which is a huge, danger to someone who is normally healthy, who can walk around, who probably is exercising, then all of a sudden their muscles are cramping and so tight that they no longer want to walk around. And I talk about this in my book, Education Over Medication, because this is actually what happened to my father. And when we removed the medication, they had him on metformin for his elevated blood sugars. And so we removed the medication, guess what? His blood sugars normalized. And my father was always complaining about his legs being painful. Removed the medication, all of a sudden my dad didn't have problems walking anymore. Okay, so that was just one case with my father, and I'm imagining that a lot of people are experiencing this, and they just sort of chalk it up to old age, because we go in, you tell your doctor, hey, I'm having knee problems, and you're in your late 40s, 50s. They're like, oh, well, that's normal, stretch, blah, 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 blah. But they never necessarily correlate it back to the drug. And the other thing, issue that we've discovered with statins is that it actually works too good. It actually lowers your cholesterol too low. And as I was saying before, I gave you all of those benefits. You begin to lose some of those benefits because the drug is working too good at lowering your cholesterol. And I'm going to talk about this in a second, but our body makes the liver makes 80% of our cholesterol in our bodies. Okay, the vast majority of that is made at night when you're sleeping. Okay, so the reason why I'm bringing that up is we don't the real issue is not the quantity of healthy fats that we need, but the quality. Okay, so we're actually eating too much, and I'll explain what makes cholesterol so dangerous, because essentially what happens is you start consuming so much, especially in the standard American diet. There's so much is littered everywhere. I mean, and especially the wrong kind of fats. And we're over consuming too much meat, and we're getting a lot of fat in the form of saturated fat. So that's a major issue as well too. Okay, so what makes cholesterol dangerous? Because I just told you how good it is for you. What makes it dangerous is that when we're consuming excess amounts, and we are, it's in everything, especially processed products. Okay, now if you eat cholesterol in the form of nature, especially plants, you don't really have that concern. Okay, you're not going to be able to overeat it. Okay, and even if you did, you wouldn't have the same effects that you would have if you were eating a lot of processed man-made fat, which is very, very dangerous compared to natural fat, as you would have with plant fat. Or, the other thing is we're over consuming meat as well too, which is loaded with saturated fat. Okay. The other thing that is really important is that, and I just mentioned it, is saturated fat. Okay. Not saturated fat, but trans fat. Trans fat is a man-made fat that is banned in many countries, but is not banned in the US. And that fat does not break down in the way that we need to. So essentially what happens is that it consistently packs onto our bodies, and it becomes rancid, and it creates its own toxins. So it's hugely important we know and understand that for the same reasons other countries have banned trans fats, we need to ban them as well too. So that means looking and reading the labels on your products, because there are no warning labels for trans fat, even though they're in our foods, and they've been sort of labeled as something that is not only terrible for your diet, but also terrible for your health as well too. Now, what I want to do is talk real quickly about a study that came out called the Jupiter study that was conducted by Harvard. And in this study, what they looked at was both fat, or high LDL, aka bad cholesterol, and inflammation. Okay. And this study, I think, is the telltale sign that shows us what the real issue is, because as I said before, the oxidation of fat is the real issue, because oxidation, let me explain what that is. Oxidation of fat is like the rust you see when somebody gets old, the rust you see on a car, the rust you see when you cut an apple open and it begins to brown. That's oxidation. Or when somebody is in the sun for too long and the skin starts to wrinkle over time, that's oxidation. Okay. Now that can happen internally. And the reason why that happens internally is because we're creating so much inflammation in the body. And then B, the free radicals that are in the body as well too. The free radicals are causing the oxidation. And then C, we don't have enough antioxidants in our diet. Okay. And when you think about antioxidants, You think about things like berries, okay? You think about fruits. You think from things from nature. That's where you're going to get your antioxidants from. And because we're not eating enough fruits and vegetables, it makes sense why we don't have enough antioxidants, which means that we're going to oxidize a lot. And not only fats, but our cells are going to oxidize a lot, which means we're going to rust, which means we're going to age prematurely. Okay, but the oxidation of fats specifically is one of the real issues, because when those fats become oxidized, they become dangerous in the body as well too. Now, getting back to the study that was conducted at Harvard, the Jupiter study, what they looked at was, again, LDL, or AKA bad cholesterol, and inflammation. What they discovered was when somebody had high LDL, when their cholesterol was high, but the inflammation in their body was low, there was little to no risk, okay, for heart attacks and stroke. However, when they had an average LDL, which was, let's say it was right at normal or above, slightly above, and then high inflammation, they noticed that there was an increased risk. And when that person had high LDL, aka bad cholesterol, and high inflammation, they had the highest risk. So the real issue was the inflammation, okay? It wasn't necessarily the cholesterol, it was the inflammation in combination with the high cholesterol, which of course could lead to oxidation as well too. And so the real focus should be on the inflammation. And so what is causing inflammation in our diet? The foods that we're eating. A lot of us are eating an inflammatory diet, okay? Our lifestyles, heavy metals that we're putting in our bodies in the form of foods, in the form of environmental toxins, in the form of fillings, that amalgam fillings that our dentists put in our teeth. So those heavy metals, toxicity that we get from food, toxicity we get from the environment, household products, cosmetic products, hygienic products, and all of this is what contributes to the liver slowly but surely breaking down and becoming dysfunctional. Okay. And as the liver becomes dysfunctional, this is what I want to get into today. This is the main point of what I'm talking about. One of the primary functions of the liver is to maintain healthy fat levels in the body. Okay. To maintain healthy cholesterol levels in the body. Because as I said before, cholesterol is essential for all of the things that I mentioned before. Okay. Now, 80% of the cholesterol in the blood is made from the liver. Okay. 80%. That's a huge chunk. And most of it is made at night, okay, when you're sleeping. Okay. Now, the reason why cholesterol becomes an issue is not because the cholesterol that is being made by your liver, is because of the type of cholesterol that you're consuming, the unhealthy type of cholesterol that we find in trans fats, that we find in processed foods, that we find in animal products. And we'll get into some of those saturated fats in just a second. But also the excessive amount that we're consuming in our diets too, because food companies know we love two things primarily. We love sugar and we love fat, okay? Fat makes things creamy and fat makes things, for a lot of people is also attached to that texture as well too. So people sort of look for that in the diet. And food companies know that. And so they try to stuff it in wherever they can, okay? The other issue when it comes to how cholesterol could be caused by a dysfunctional or sluggish liver, okay? High cholesterol can lead to a fatty liver, okay? So the more cholesterol, the more fat you're putting in your body, your liver has to figure out what to do with it. And eventually some of that fat is going to start to become deposited, first of all, in the liver and then inside of the liver cells, okay? And as the liver becomes more and more infused with this cholesterol, it becomes a fatty liver and it becomes dysfunctional, okay? And as you lose function with your liver, you got to remember what I told you. 80% of the cholesterol is made by the liver. So as it becomes dysfunctional, less and less of it is going to be made by the liver, okay? Now let's get into the difference between saturated and unsaturated fats. So what I tell people is that you really want to focus on plant fats and not necessarily saturated fats, okay? Saturated fats are going to be cheese, okay? Cheese is majority saturated fat. Essentially what you're eating when you're eating cheese is the fat that was pulled out of milk, okay? That block of cheese that you see is the fat that was pulled out of meat. That is saturated fat, okay? Milk, of course, like I just mentioned, meat and trans fats. Those are the primary saturated fats that are ruining our health and causing your cholesterol to be elevated. The fats that we want to eat are going to be unsaturated fats like avocados, nuts like walnuts, Brazil nuts, seeds, sesame seeds, hemp seeds, okay, olives. Those are the type of fats we want in our diet and we want to consume to make sure we're getting the kind of fats that we need in our diet, okay? Now, what is the solution? This is why I tell people their liver health is essential. Your liver health is so essential because once your liver starts to break down, you lose not only the function we've been talking about, but you lose a lot of the other functions. The liver has over 200 functions that it does for the body. And once the liver becomes dysfunctional and isn't able to break down and metabolize and detoxify the body, now you're in trouble, okay? And when I say you're in trouble, your health is in trouble specifically. So the most important thing is we want to make sure our liver health is good, because when our liver health is good, our liver can protect us, okay? Even when it comes to breaking down certain foods, we can't even extract out some of the nutrients from it as a result of our liver not being completely functional, okay? And most people have unhealthy livers. And the reason why they have unhealthy livers is because their liver is constantly being assaulted by prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs, toxic foods, fast foods, processed foods, refined foods, too much sugar in the diet, too much fat in the diet, constantly being assaulted, and the liver is literally trying to figure out what to do with this stuff. And the reason why it's trying to figure out what to do with it is because, again, fast food and processed food is a relatively new invention, especially when you look at the full timeline of human existence. It literally just came on the scene in the last 2 seconds of our existence, okay? Prior to the 1940s, primarily what people ate was natural food. Prior to the 1940s, most people didn't even have a refrigerator. It was a luxury. So most people had to go out and get their food daily. So it had to be fresh. And there was no section in the grocery store titled organic food. Everything was organic, okay? There were no genetically modified foods. They came onto the scene in the 1990s and burst onto the scene in the 2000s. So everything has shifted in terms of our food. Food got industrialized after the 1950s. So it's so important we know and understand the vast majority of the food that we're eating today is an invention, and in my opinion, shouldn't even be called food, okay? And so our bodies can't recognize it. It doesn't know how to metabolize it. It doesn't know how to utilize it, and it can't be eliminated, so it accumulates in the body, creating waste, creating damage, creating oxidation, creating inflammation, damaging the tissues, damaging the cells, and this is what leads to dysfunction, okay? So this is why it's so important to have a healthy liver, okay? And this is primarily one of the things that my detox does. It not only cleans out the liver, detoxifies the liver, and restores some of the function. One of the primary things that it does is a full body detox. So it's cleaning out all of the elimination organs, okay? Which is important because you can detox the liver, but if all of those pathways for that toxicity to get out are clogged up, just think about it, like most people are constipated. Most people aren't clearing enough through their skin. Most people don't have healthy kidney function. So how are these toxins gonna get out through the body? All right, so you can detox the liver, but then if it doesn't have a way to get out, it's a real problem. So that's why it's so important not to just do a liver cleanse by itself. You should be opening up all of the elimination pathways, okay? So for all of this toxicity to get out in whatever way it can, because certain toxins are liquid toxins and they have to maybe go out through the skin or the kidneys. Certain toxins are solid toxins and they have to be eliminated through the bowels. And certain toxins have to be eliminated through the lymphatic system. Certain toxins become gas and have to be breathed out. Okay, so it's so important. We have to open up all the elimination pathways to be able to fully get all of these toxins out of the body. Okay. Thanks for watching this video, but be sure to check the next video out that's right here. But everything I talk about is how do we take a holistic and natural approach to healing other than a man-made approach? And also, how do we prevent dis-ease in the body as well too? Because, you know, they say